Well, the theme of the show is the wonderfully rich, variegated history that Bal Harbor's had in its 70 years of existence and in the preceding years before it became an incorporated village. You know, the site itself has such great history to it. When Miami was really undeveloped and was almost a primeval place. I found a lot of surprises in the photographs that I've captured and that we've selected for this 70th anniversary. I found photographs by a very, very prominent early Miami photographer, Richard Hoyt, that were shot in the late 20s on what was then completely undeveloped land that becomes Bal Harbor. Bal Harbor, in many ways, the idea of it was a product of the great real estate boom in the mid-20s. And preparation was moving forward to do something with Bal Harbor in the second half of the 20s, but the boom collapsed. So everything was put off for that Depression decade, and then the war came. And so after the war, there's this tremendous flush of prosperity in America, including this area. And now we begin to develop Bal Harbor as the village of Bal Harbor in 1946. But before then, you had a cut made in the early 20s that we know as Baker's Haulover. It brings the bay and the ocean together in that area. It's eventually bridged. In the 1930s, not much goes on there, but by the early 40s, we're at war with the Axis powers, and that becomes an Army gunnery range. That in itself was, I'd read about that, but to see the photographs of, you know, a training photograph was absolutely amazing. Bal Harbor was wonderfully planned, and Bal Harbor is a wonderful community in that you've got oceanfront property, which has lent itself primarily to apartments and hotels like the Americana, Kenilworth earlier, and then it has that residential section that's separated by a very important road, Collins Avenue. Collins Avenue, just to digress a bit, was probably the most famous tourist street in America through the 1940s, probably well into and through the 1950s. And so on the west side, you've got the residential base of Bal Harbor, which is, you know, very upscale, very beautiful, very well planned. And then on the east side, you know, you've got the condos and the hotels and the kind of like the resort part of it. And so I find it a very interesting community divided by a very important street historically and otherwise. Well, it's really interesting because the Seaview is one of the very first buildings on the ocean front and one of the very first hotels. And not only that, but it's been a stalwart member of the Village of Bal Harbor community. You know, they've been open to a lot of things, and a lot of good things have happened there that have involved the community, art exhibitions and what have you. So I think it's the most beautiful place to have one part of our celebration, which is the indoor part with photographs. And then the beach itself speaks for itself. It's the beach. And it's the same beach that the barefoot mailman trod upon in the latter part of the 19th century. And it's the beach that seafarers probably touched on somewhere along the way. I mean, it has this wonderful history, some of which is undocumented. But it also speaks to this break that we know as Baker's Haulover, named for a gentleman who lived in the area by the last name of Baker that had land in the area. Haulover is a reference to the fact that there was an isthmus there, that a thin strip of land surrounded on water by two sides. It connects two other bodies of land where seafarers, including, we believe, Seminole Indians, would pull their canoes from the ocean to the bay or the bay to the ocean. And then there was that cut made in the early 1920s, which officially makes then Miami Beach and other areas an island. Until then, Miami Beach, or the whole area we know up to the Broward line, was a barrier peninsula. So you've got that. It's very historical. You know, the bridge goes over there, so it makes that connection between the two. And if you go up to Haulover Beach, just north of there, which means we're really out of Bal Harbor now, you're looking at the site, just to bring this into the civil rights era, of a swim-in that happened one day in 1945 that prompted the county to desegregate and prepare a beach for African Americans on the southern part of Virginia Key, which is many miles south of where we are. So there's a lot of history tied there. And it's the idea that you've got the ocean front and then you've got this community that looks out on Biscayne Bay. So you've got two bodies of water that have framed and shaped this community. And I find that to be very unique. Well, Bal Harbor's growth is really part of the pieces of the post-World War II puzzle of Greater Miami. That is that everything was booming here, as it was throughout much of the country, but this was a great resort, you know, with the weather and the water and all that. And the developers of Bal Harbour, as I mentioned before, wanted to do this in the second half of the 1920s, but economic conditions weren't there. And then the war came. And so they had to wait, and Robert Graham and others with this Detroit automotive background become the early developers. And so it's a community that's one of many in post-World War II Miami, but in many ways it's very unique to itself. You know, Key Biscayne was a community, Bay Harbor was a community, Bal Harbour was its own community. The way it was planned, the people who resided there, for me it's always been a wonderfully run, neatly run municipality. And I think that sets it apart from a lot of other places. And whereas Bay Harbor today is experiencing the tear down of so many of these so-called MIMO buildings, Bal Harbour seems to be, pardon me for saying this, a much more stable community, where there seems to be a lot more preservation and a lot more permanence to it. Key Biscayne's experienced the tear down of the last 20 years of a lot of the homes that faced out in the bay and even some of the hotels on the ocean. Bal Harbour has pretty much maintained itself. Now the ocean area is a more fluid area because it has among the nicest beaches in the world. And so we've seen some, you know, development and redevelopment there. But it's a one-of-a-kind place. And I'm very excited about this, being able to share this, and I will be sharing this with Bal Harborites and whoever else attends.